Hey readers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire Books, and I have brought on my friend Jason Perez from his channel Shelf Stories, and we're going to talk about Aiden Thomas's Cemetery Boys. How you doing today, Jason?
Yo, my peoples, what's up? I'm doing great. It's 8 a.m. We the first thing up, we're gonna we gotta review a book now. So I am ready. I am wired. I had my banana and peanut butter for breakfast. I'm good to go. Totally unplugged. Oh my god. Tells you all we are on the same page.
Literally and figuratively. So do you want to give a quick synopsis of what Cemetery Boys is about? So we're going to review it. We're going to do a spoiler-free discussion, and then we'll warn you, and then we're going to talk about spoilers.
Yeah, so we'll only go like a minute, maybe a couple of minutes, just to the people who don't know what it is. We want to set you up and answer that critical question: is this worth your time? Whether you pay for it or get it from a library or whatever it is. So, short answer, I think so. Yeah, I think it is worth your time if, and we'll give you the kind of fill in some of the things. So, it is a book about a gay trans boy named Yadriel who is born into the book calls it a brujex community. So brujos and brujas, it is the Latino version of witches. And we say witches and we say, magic, so to speak, especially around the dead. So the book takes place in the setting of Dia de Muertos in Los Angeles. And Yadriel is, what's the best way to say it? So he wants to be a brujo, the community's not letting him. So yeah. It is, it's kind of coming into that tension point, right? Of, how does a trans boy who looks like a girl, but is, and the family knows him as a girl, but now he self-identifies as a boy. He does all the, in terms of his dress, in terms of his self-identification, all the kind of things. So then that is the kind of cultural background of the plot. And then as you move forward, you're going to have hijinks that bring you into that young adult fantasy type thing, because it's Dia de Muertos, so you're going to get spirits. Yadriel, in order to prove that he is a genuine brujo, summons a dead spirit. Junior, what was his name?
Julian.
Julian, there you go. Julian Diaz. And they have adventures. ... So that's where the spoilers come in, right? So you have the cultural piece. You have some transgender pieces as well. You also have just meat and potatoes, young adult kind of adventure with some supernatural elements as well. So you're going to get a lot of layers with this thing.
Yeah, I'd say that's about right. One thing I really like about this book in particular is that, so I do want to point out that, so Yadriel's struggle as a trans man is part of the story, but it's not really the defining aspect of who he is. And I think that that's what makes this book special and makes it worth your time, either because you want to read some YA that's actually representative, or if you want to give somebody else the experience of reading YA that is representative. Because, Yadriel has, different aspects of his identity that he's dealing with, but the plot of the book is really about his adventures with and growing connection with Julian and a mystery of a disappeared brujo in his family. So, I think that the book is certainly worth your time in the sense that we need more stories like this to exist. And this is a good one. It's very well written. The writing's very warm. The world is very nicely created. Right. And Jason, I'm sure you can say more about that part.
So I am Puerto Rican. I am not a Mexican person. So I don't have Dia de Muertos in my culture. However, I do have abuelitas who throw chanclas whenever you're bad. I do have multi-generational family. Like there's so many of the Latino culture that I know, that I'm familiar with in this book. And it is so woven in, and it is so warm and sensitive. And I really dug it. There was so many moments where I was like, yeah, see, they got that right. That feels so good. I think that's my favorite book. The favorite part about this book, it is a book with a trans protagonist, but it is not a trans book. so to speak. It's not hitting you in the head with the issues that trans people face. It has that. It absolutely has that. And I love that they baked it into the fact that this is a cultural clash, right? So like Latino culture is gendered and there's no getting around that, and they explore that really in a really smart, sensitive way, and they don't lose the plot either. Like, at a certain point you kind of forget that this is, and you just kind of along for the a young adult ride of trying to help this spirit try to reconnect, try to find family, the things that brujos do in order to help spirits move on to the next plane. So I really, really appreciate that. So the two things, my favorite parts: one, a very warmly drawn, authentic feeling world, and two, it is very sensitive to trans issues, but without being a trans book, it is a book that anybody can read, even if you're not very familiar with that experience.
The other aspect that I liked about it, so I'm a high school teacher, and I think about it like this. So Julian and his friends are considered sort of a wild bunch, and there's a part where Spirit Julian hears somebody suggest that he was in a gang, and he gets really upset. And the other thing I really liked about the book is the way that it drew kids on the margin as good, loving people who have really good bonds with each other, and there's no judgment of like this kind of kid, that kind of kid, on a number of levels throughout the book. And I really thought that was a great touch. I think a lot of teenagers especially really found family and those friendships really important and valuable, and this book really valued them.
Right. In Spanish we call it la frontera. Frontera is the borderland, the boundary. And like there's a growing body of Spanish literature, not just in fiction but in nonfiction, in all these places, of exploring la frontera, which is the forgotten people, marginalized people. That is unfortunately a Latino experience in our area, where we can be often marginalized, whether it's an immigrant farm worker or whether it's trans people or any kind of different experience of not fitting in and being on the margin and being at risk of slipping down. But we're beautiful people anyway there. I love that you said that. I didn't click for me until you said that yeah, it's a wonderful exploration of the boundary people, and not making assumptions that they're like, oh, hard scrabbling. Yes, they are, but there's also heart there. There's also room for people to be compassionate. And the book definitely explores those themes as well. Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about what we liked about the book. It's got just so many good things to appreciate about it. But without giving too much away before our spoilers, it is very much a YA novel. The
plot.
In my opinion, the plot has a few pitfalls, especially at the end. There are some moments that are a little bit cavity-inducingly saccharine, and things work out a little too pretty for my taste, and that's what I'll say.
Anybody who's read a lot, I haven't read a ton of YA, but I've read my share, and there's some tropes that come up. There's like the adult bad guy, the teen romance and hormones flowing over. Like, you're gonna get all that, and it's a little bit strange to see a book that's an exploration of such a not talked about a lot experience, but in the frame of something you've experienced with many, many books, which is the plot of a young adult novel. Again, there's too much good stuff here to not want to read this, but we did want to just flag that there, you may just kind of like roll your eyes at some point, or maybe not. Maybe you love the romance and the hormones chasing and the adventure. Maybe you'll love all that.
Right. It just depends on how jaded and old you are.
Yeah, we are jaded and old.
but before we move into the spoiler aspect of this, I mean, I'll let you sum up after me, since we'll transition. But I think it's a really good book. I think it's worth your time. I think if you're going to read a YA book this year, that's a very strong contender for the one that you would choose. So
read more than one. Read more than one. A YA book.
You have what, like 10 days left this year?
This book did not take a long time.
Yeah, you could probably read it 3 times between now and 2021.
Yeah, right.
It would feel better than the vast majority of 2020 because it was actually a good book. So.
Yeah, right.
But Jason, any final thoughts before we move into spoilers?
I think we're good. Now this is it's recommended.
Yes, give it a read. So, spoiler alert.
Spoilers.
Run away. Unless you are a true brujo who can commune with the spirits of spoilers, you need to go.
Yeah, I better watch it. I better watch it. Some spirit's gonna show up in my basement. Where's my portaje?
All right, so spoilers. Do you want us to go ahead and talk about the ending and just get that out of the way?
Oh,
all right.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go for it. This book was a little too perfect in the sense that, okay, it turns out that Julian the Spirit isn't actually dead. He's just in a space between life and death. So you get this ending where Julian gets to live. Yadriel gets to heroically sacrifice himself and still live. And then his cousin, who is a vegan and refuses to practice traditional bruja healing for various reasons, also manages to pull off some serious magic, save everyone. And there's like a huge romantic, crazy outpouring of joy. And like, on the one hand, I appreciate that. It's wonderful. But on the other, like, oh, come on, really?
Yeah. When I was talking about YA tropes, there was that one part where Julian is alive, miraculously, goes over to the dying body of Yadriel and goes, "Mi querido! Get away from him, you adult, mi querido!" You gotta be kidding me. This is so lame.
But like, I mean, is that, I feel like my teenagers are so jaded that to some of them, this would be lame. I'm not sure. Maybe they just love it. Like, I mean, YA is a challenge because it's hard to review it as an adult, I think.
Not at 13 and 14. Like, if it's like 17, then yeah, this is going to be a little, it's amazing how much changes in a couple of years. But I mean, I didn't read that as a that old. And I could see like there's, you know, for various reasons, maybe there's a little bit of a kind of like Arrested Development sense of like they're maybe in some ways 14, you know, in their mentality, kind of like, because they haven't gotten love, you know, they haven't got, so like that desire in them for like just true unqualified, I love you for who you are, is like just ready to burst out of the seam. So in terms of like a 13 or 14-year-old, that when I have interact with them, I can see that, oh, she's the love of my life, I'm gonna love her forever. You're 13.
Yeah, it's got massive first relationship hormone vibes all over it.
Oh, yeah.
And and you know, one thing I really like about the relationship that they develop is that Julian and Yadriel really see each other for who they actually are, and they really appreciate each other as people, and that is so healthy and it's so good. That said, if I were Julian's teacher at school, I would first of all be calling him and forcing him to come to school because that is my nature. But I would have been like, all right, that was a great 50 minutes. Please go. Because he's so obnoxious. Like it's like he's described as very lively and full of life. But what this actually means is super temperamental and immature and difficult. And like, again, that's age appropriate. And he is very charming.
And it's also Yadriel is the only POV for the most part.
Yeah.
So through Yadriel's eyes, that annoyance is, you know, like I love her. I think the book does a good job with that in terms of, because I can feel like there are some books who kind of fall into the trap of the kind of like omniscient narrator.
Yeah.
We're like, okay, let me see things from the everybody perspective, and like, oh, that person is this and that person is that. That person, you know, Yadriel is not into that. Yadriel is looking at the set of his jaw and like how and the cuteness of him. That's what he sees.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fun to watch Julian morph from annoyance into like babe within like a short period of time. It
was two sides of the same coin. It was there the whole time.
The other thing that I really did like about the book too is that, so I thought, okay, I didn't necessarily like the climax of the book, but I liked the climax of the book was not Enrique deciding to acknowledge Yadriel's ability. So Enrique is Yadriel's father.
Yes.
And Enrique is Yadriel's father, and he is the one who, so Yadriel's mother has died. She was supportive of him in his full identity and wanted him to be initiated as a brujo as he felt appropriate. Enrique is holding the process up in the book. And so one of the reasons that Yadriel has a need to have this important moment of his life where he should be supported by his family in secrecy is that he doesn't feel accepted. Other adults in his life are trying to prevent it. And then Enrique realizes what Julian has done, realizes that Lady Death, like who is their goddess, you know, has acknowledged him as himself, and realizes, ooh, I effed up, and is suitably sorry. But like throughout the book, you know, people dead name Yadriel and people misgender Yadriel, and it really pains him. But the climax of the book is not his family turning around, because the turnaround starts before the climax. And I actually thought that was a good choice narratively speaking.
That's what makes this not a trans book. It makes it a book with a trans protagonist.
Yes.
And that you're in for a larger book experience, which I think needs to happen. Like if it's a trans book, it's for a trans community. Yeah. It's not necessarily doesn't give that access to people who, like, you know, if you're not trans and maybe you've never even heard of it, or like it's only a thing on TV, it's not in your life, you know, you still want you're still familiar with tropes, you're still familiar with being heroic at the end of the day, you're still familiar with, you know, the seemingly nice uncle who turns out is a jaguar priest who is summoning a death god or something. You're not familiar with exactly that, but you know the tropes, so it's like it's nice to have something familiar but then have that extra piece in there as a way to make you kind of rethink what you thought was familiar. That's a very, very good combination. One of my favorite parts of the book.
Yeah, although I was super disappointed in Tio Catrice. Okay, so
do you want to talk to them about
Tio Catrice's
Someone has
situation?
To be the bad guy. There's always a bad. It's the NCIS rule. Someone in the first act is always the bad guy for the third act. It is never somebody external.
Of course,
and he was the only one. He was the only. What is it going to be? Abuelita.
That would have been amazing, actually. No kidding. But no, because Abuelita's like, oh, where are the jaguar daggers? Like throughout the book, and yeah, I mean, you can see it coming, but I don't know. I felt like I didn't totally buy how sympathetic he was, and then how evil he snapped to be.
I think there was a huge, like the one to the other, like him all of a sudden becoming like this cartoon mustache twirling, you know, a death god summoner. That was a little bit.
Although it's a jaguar, so it has to be more like, wow. I'm joking. Yeah. I'm joking.
Liz has to get in one row every video.
I don't, but I should start just because it's so embarrassing.
That's your cat reference. You have to get one cat reference per video. This video is devolving. Anyway. Well, I mean, I think that you're exactly right. That whole thing of like, you know, he becomes Tio Catrice becomes just, it's a cartoon. And it was almost hard to follow. As I was reading it was almost hard to follow. It's like, okay, this guy is like, he's a Scooby-Doo buffoon now, you know, where before he was this warm person. And I don't know, that was a little bit disappointing, but that goes to the ending. We can, you know, I think that there's better parts of the book to talk about.
Absolutely. So, you know, we talked about family acceptance before and warmth of writing. And I do think that for me, really the heart of the book is how Yadriel draws his identity from his family and also has an identity in conflict with his family. And for me, that is really the best part.
Sure. Because,
like, you know, he's kissing his grandmother on the cheek, you know, and Abuelita is asking him to go up in the rafters and get stuff. And then Abuelita is calling him Miji, you know, mija, and it's like, no, like, don't do that. Don't do that. And, you know, I think that's just done so well.
Yeah.
So well.
Okay. Anything else in terms of spoilers that we have to, or the spoiler section we have to say?
I will say that, like, while I understand I felt like the romance plot line really took over towards the end, like that last day on Earth with Julian, with like the car and like the ghost kiss and just.
And playing the reggaeton, there was a soundtrack. It was set up as a movie.
Yeah, I would watch this though.
As a movie.
I would 100% watch the Cemetery Boys miniseries. That would be adorable, actually.
I don't know about a miniseries. I'll go a movie. I think this one. I think you get this one in a movie. Not every series has to be a miniseries.
I know. I just I don't know. I feel like my students would really appreciate something like this. You know, and it should exist. There should be more books like this, just perhaps with less twee plot lines. So the other thing that we were going to talk about is, and I don't really have a big say in this, you know, in English, I still work on saying, hey, you guys. And I know that that's gendered language, and I'm trying to work that out. I no longer just casually refer to people as dude, because I feel like if I can change my language to help people feel better, then I want to. But, you know, one thing I'm really curious about is, so the way that Yadriel describes his community as the Brujex community, like, would Enrique or would Abuelita use the same term? And then how do we help find like a meeting place, even on the linguistic level?
Right. So then, a full disclosure, we recorded this once. We did it once through. I gave my thoughts, and I'm like, let me kind of restate this because it's hard to talk about. This is something where, there are hearts at stake. There are, there's egos at stake. There's all these, like, there's emotions at stake. Like, which pronouns do we use? What do we call people? It's such an important thing. And I wanted to put it out there. So I'm a psychotherapist by trade, and I work with a lot of, not a ton. I'm not a specialist like in it, but like I have had clients. I'm pretty good at it, by the way, because I've had some people. But I have had people come in who are transitioning. So, like, male to female, female to male, they're experiencing what our field calls gender dysphoria. So, like, just this like distress connected with their gender identity because it's not settled. Like, they don't just kind of look at their physical selves and conclude one way or another about their gender. Sex and gender are very, very different, and you learn this in this work. And I have a lot of love for that situation because it'd be very, very painful to kind of go through family dynamics. I want to say all that. I have so much love for trans people, trans individuals, and trans community. I want to put that out there as a context for, I want to like look at language, and I want to look at how the book and, that larger community uses a phrase like Latinx and uses a phrase like brute hex, and using that X construction to kind of say, okay, Latino, Latina, or we're going to call this Latinx so that we can, cover the bases, so to speak. And that's an intentional choice. The Liz linked me a review of this book. And, it was from a trans perspective, I believe. And there was this quote there, and I wanted to kind of reflect the quote. So the quote is, Spanish, talking about the language, is an arbitrarily gendered language, and it could be innocuously insidious. So yes, it can. Language can do violence, and like having to fit in the gender box can do violence, but that's not how the general community experiences their language. The general community experiences their language as, freeing, like it makes sense to people in the community to, divide the world into male and female. Dios en el cielo, that's the person that did it. It was not arbitrary. This is cultural, religious, tradition that has been handed to us. And to be told from the outside that that my culture is arbitrary, my culture does damage, even if it's from what do I want to say? A depressed person, and the trans community are from a depressed perspective. So I can get that. It's like, okay, you look, this is oppressive to me. Stop that. But the people, we're talking the abuelitos and the abuelitas, they don't experience that yet. And so to refer to that community, the larger community, the non, trans and non-trans, as Latinx is difficult. It raises difficulties for me. And that is not to say that I have anything against trans individuals, all the love in the world. It's just, I feel like we need to have a larger conversation so that we have more larger communal buy-in as to what words work and what words don't. So I hope that expresses what I'm trying to say.
I think that that's actually probably a conversation that's happening across a lot of languages, because Spanish is not the only gendered language. So as a Latin teacher, one thing that a lot of Latin teachers do is, we're all in the middle of a big argument, and like including students, right, about what kind of pronouns we can assign to people who don't want the pronouns that you would assume they would have based on the circumstances of their birth. And so we are dealing with, like, because Latin has 3 genders actually, so you can have masculine, feminine, and neuter, and like you're not going to put a bunch of people who are non-binary into like the neuter category. That's rude.
Yeah, they're not
weird.
blenders. They're not.
No. And it's very difficult, I think, to choose. And because of the way that Latin works, it's a little bit harder to just throw, like in English, you can just throw they on and just treat they as singular. And I know that people have arguments about that, but honestly, they singular has been in use for a long time, and I don't see why it shouldn't just be in more use. It's an easy switch. But because in Latin, everything is kind of gendered, and also the number matters. So like if you have a they pronoun, you're also going to have a different verb ending, and you're going to have a different, like, we're still working that out as a community, what to do. And like, we're going to get there, I hope. But it's a community in progress.
and it's an open question of who is doing the working out, right? So in my community, I work as a psychotherapist and social worker in the community. So I'm not just kind of like theorizing about this stuff. This is stuff that I live every single day. There are folks that I work with who feel like a term like Latinx is a woke white liberal thing. It is a bunch of academics telling me how I should talk. And that, that our community, and every community, like, the Black community and the Indian community and all, they experience, that's what kind of quote unquote white supremacy is all about. White supremacy is a bunch of white people telling me what to say and how to think, right? And so that doesn't make sense to somebody in a oppressed situation. It's like, no, I'm trying to attain liberation here. I'm trying to address subtle microaggressions here. But from that's what, that oppressed person is saying. But what the community is hearing is, you're telling me what to think and you tell me what to say. And that doesn't sound like a word that I would say. I'm going to keep on calling myself Latino and Latina. And so, and once again, I have to be very careful with this. This is not meant to like be a judgment. It's not meant to kind of say anybody's doing anything wrong. It's just a question of tactics and strategy. It's a question of like, let's really come together and have and have those conversations over a while. An oppressed person does not want to hear that. They want things to happen now because oppression has continued to happen. But you're talking about a larger community who they are not participating consciously in power dynamics. They're going along with what their culture has given them. And there is also a culture of, well, where is this coming from? Is this really coming from you? Or is this coming from academia? Or is this coming from white, woke, liberal, quote unquote, like tell me what to do and say? And I'm sensitive to that.
I actually don't know. Who did coin the term?
It came from academics, and like the trans community kind of adopted that, but it's originally in like a postmodern context. So like, does anybody out there know who Jacques Derrida is?
Yes. Yes. I just don't know how to read it up.
Whoever's watching it. But it's you talk about that postmodern, the questioning of language that happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s in the academia, and then it's a hop, skip, and a jump to look at culture through that lens, to look at culture as socially constructed, and to look at language as morphable and changeable. And I love all that. That's fantastic stuff. But how does the morphing happen, and who is doing the morphing, and what are the intentions of the morphing, and then what are the unintended effects of the morphing? That's all kind of playing out too. Right. It's Latinx, that one's, I don't know, like I don't know a lot of Spanish words that end in X. And now that is the word to which we are going to call our whole community. It's for a very noble goal. It's for a very noble goal of inclusion, but I think the whole community, I think we need to have a moment of the whole community accepting it, as opposed to and like kind of stripping out any kind of suspected power dynamic from it. So
interesting. So I have no cultural place from which I can comment on that. Right. I do know that I do know we have, all I can think about is English, where you have Mr. and Ms. and now Mix is sometimes appearing as a form of address. I just avoided the whole thing and became doctor.
Yeah. Well, that's how language changes. You try stuff, you put stuff in and then certain stuff will uptake, and then certain stuff will stick. But I also
think though that works like Cemetery Boys. So I actually think that the other way that language changes, right, is through common use. So if something becomes common use, it just works. Like, you could say, quit trying to make fetch happen, but plenty of other things do happen, right? So I think that a work like Cemetery Boys, outside of its just pure entertainment as YA, outside of its cultural importance because students will see themselves in it, if more works that refer to Latinx and Brujex communities continue to be published by members of the community, then you will see linguistic change. And so I think that that's one of the things that makes Cemetery Boys particularly important, because it's not just a contribution to literature, it's actually a contribution to language and language use, because the book is doing well. People are reading this book. And if there are more that come out and use the same terminology, eventually the kids who are reading the books will pick up the terms. And so what you publish and who gets to see it, I think it has repercussions beyond anything that we can fully understand, and that's why Cemetery Boys is so worth the time and worth the thought.
I guess I agree with that. That's how language change. I am not a person that is like a person that says, "Oh, we've said it this way," and like we're coming off the whole doctor thing. Like, what does doctor really mean? Go ahead.
Yeah, we're still arguing that one.
You're right. But language is a contested environment. I guess my only thing, and I'm perfectly happy with that process. I guess my only thing is, what about the old terms? Are the old terms only bad? Are the old terms only, you know, like exclusionary and power driven and exclusionary? I said exclusionary twice. Are the old terms like really like worth ditching? And the people that are attached to those old terms, what happens with them? Are we just going to say, we'll use this new term, it's better? This is like, human beings just don't work like that. I think change can happen, but I think change happens in genuine conversation and community. And I just, not to say that this book is not doing that. In fact, the book is, you know, is doing that. But just, you know, the way that the phrase, I want to take the phrase out of the book. I want to take the phrase away, you know, like that, take it on its own. That phrase is it's contested. I'll just say that. I think it's a contested phrase, and I think I want to continue to have conversations. I don't want to make a judgment. I just want to say, okay, let's put a pause on Latinx and really talk about it and what it really means and what it's really saying.
Yeah, and I think that if we think about each other as a community of readers, of thinkers, of, you know, people who are all coexisting, I mean, there's no alternative but to have a good conversation.
Absolutely. That's what this is all about, Liz. That's what it's all about. Good conversation.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on, Jason. Cemetery Boys, y'all, you should absolutely read it. It is a fantastic piece of YA work, despite its YA-ness. No, I'm playing. Happy reading, everybody.
Later, everybody.